of hogwash.
Oh, dear.
What tarnation has that got to do with the Ottawa Valley, eh?
Not everyone liked the film.
I think they're just trying to get attention. That's what I can figure.
Not everyone likes reality.
Like having that poor girl take all her clothes off like that.
Oh.
I knew they wouldn't like that part. But that's reality too.
Pretty bad, if you ask me.
Actually, I was amazed at how authentic it ended up looking.
Gee, that's some way to spend our tax dollars, eh?
And I can think of worse.
Is this supposed to attract tourism, business, something? Really?
Sorry, not my job.
If you want a secretary, there's lots if you just look. If you want an ad agent, you can find one in the book. If you just want sugar coating, that's not the stuff I cook. But if you want to know the valley, you're on my hook. If you want to know who done it, go out and buy the news. If you want a high school essay, let students write their views. If you want to hear some gossip and some jokes you'll want to use at your next kitchen party, I'm the company you'll choose. I come from the valley, it's where I'm from, where legends were made and remembered to this day. I come from the valley where my heart is always home. When you're raised in the valley, it's where you want to stay. If I'd wanted glam and glitter, there were places I could go. If I'd wanted fancy dinners and to guest on TV shows. If I'd wanted real money, could have moved to Toronto.
Well, she didn't do that anyway.
We was there once. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Nor the friggin' dogs.
But I wanted real people and the stories that they told. Could have taught school but knew the hell that it could be. Reporters get callous from all that I can see. But writing is my passion, it's what's always set me free. So I became a storyteller, didn't fall far from the old tree. I come from the valley, it's where I'm from. What I heard and saw in childhood was like my bank account. I come from the valley where my heart is always home. When you're raised in the valley, you've got riches you can't count. I was rich in potato bugs, counted into tin cans. My farmer's plum trees planted by a fence. Sleigh rides from the station, newborn animals. Uncles teasing mercilessly, fiddling and nonsense. To this day, I come from the valley where my heart is always home. When you're raised in the valley, it's where you want to stay.
From the valley we come, from the valley we come, from the valley we come, from the valley
When you're raised in the valley, it's where you want to stay. When you're raised in the valley, it's where you want to stay.
Jeepers, Joan. You had to make us look like a bunch of drunks and hillbillies.
Oh, that's not true. All the children were clean and well dressed.
But what are the city people gonna think?
I'm hoping they'll understand a little more. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do.
But it's all made up.
Not all of it. And besides, what's wrong with a little embroidery here and there?
Oh, for heaven's sake.
I mean, isn't tale-telling something that we do around here? Some of the stories I told you were true. Some of the tales just chatter. Is it false, is it true? I leave it to you. The stories are one thing that matters.
Let us pray.
So, you like to hear a story? All right, I got one for you. There was this one time up in Brudenell, old Frank Lavelle. He had sheep. Now, the sheep in those days, they used to run, and there were no fences, see? So they would run up in between each other, everybody's fields, and you mix them all up, and you wouldn't know whose sheep was yours. So, old Frank had this brilliant idea. In the spring, when you have to shear your sheep, he'd leave a little tuft on their bellies so that he'd know which one was his. So, despite his best efforts, one of his sheep up and disappears. So, the next time he sees young Finnigan, he says,
Faith, have you any idea where my sheep would be?
No, I haven't, Frank, but I'll tell you what to do. Why don't you mention it to the priest on Sunday and he'll mention it in church? Maybe some of your neighbors have your sheep and you don't even know it.
Faith, I'd know her from anyone's, but I'm getting a little deaf, and I might not hear the priest if he mentions it.
Well, don't you worry about that, Frank. I'll be sitting next to you in church just as we are now, and I will nudge you when the priest mentions your sheep.
See, that sounds like a pretty good plan. So, what happens is the next Sunday comes along, and young Finnigan and old Frank, they're sitting next to each other, and the priest starts up with a marriage announcement.
This is an announcement of the marriage between Katie Sullivan and Brian Moriarty. And if there be any objections to the marriage, please speak up.
So, young Finnigan figures she'll nudge Frank in the ribs, and he jumps up and he screams,
Faith, if she's got a tuft of wool on her belly, she's mine.
Some of the stories I told you were true. Some of the tales just chatter. Is it false, is it true? I leave it to you. The story's the one thing that matters.
Paddy Haggerty from Brudenell, he had a sharp tongue and stories to tell. A poor farmer and cattle drover gave everyone stuff to tell over and over.
Some of the stories I told you were true. Some of the tales just chatter. Is it false, is it true? I leave it to you. The story's the one thing that matters.
Once Taddy met the priest down by the train, he said,
We missed you in church. We were praying for rain.
Sure, I knew that, Father. That's why I stayed home. Didn't have no umbrella, so I never come.
Some of the stories I told you were true. Some of the tales just chatter. Is it false, is it true? I leave it to you. The story's the one thing that matters.
The Ottawa Valley is a land of giants. Well, now, I'm sure you've heard of Muffalaw, and possibly McNabb. But what about Charlotte Whitten, Ottawa's first female mayor who grew up in Renfrew? Just look at that face. They called her the woman without a single unspoken thought. Now, someone cut from the same cloth, but from my family hometown, was the school mom and rabble-rouser, Phoebe McCord.
Well, I guess you know I'm Phoebe McCord from Shawville. They call me the first political warmer-upper from Pontiac County. If ice needed to be broken, if change needed to be loosed from pockets, if favors were needed, well, they called for me. So I'm here to warm you up for this show about Joan Finnigan. Well, maybe you've heard of her. Maybe you'd just rather have dessert. But relax, I say. I'm here to warm you up. I didn't always need jokes to warm a crowd. When I walked into a classroom or political meeting, folks would know that it would be, at the very least, entertaining. Sometimes I would look out at the crowd and say, well, I can see staunch conservatives there, but I can see a few liberals hiding there too. Now that's a funny thing, and you know what the liberals said. And then I'd fill in with a pithy one. Now, do you think these liberals can be turned? What do you people think? Do you think we can do anything with them? Do you? Or should we just send them on outside? Then I'd go on to tell a favorite story. You all know, of course, about the liberal who got very, very animated about his liberalism and his party policy. There he was, up on the platform, telling everyone why he voted Liberal.
Yes, yes, my friends.
He shouted.
My father was a Liberal. My grandfather was a Liberal. My great-grandfather was a Liberal. And I am liberal.
Boo!
Furthermore,
he shouted out,
my father was a Catholic. My grandfather was Catholic. My great-grandfather was Catholic. And I'm Catholic. And I'm going to stay Catholic till the end of my days. On the stage. Yes, yes, my friends.
He went on.
Tradition is very important. And I do what my forefathers did, right down to the very last detail. I am a bachelor. My father was a bachelor. My grand...
Get off the stage! Get off!
Yes, there he was, hoist on his own petard. By the time I got through telling that story, everyone in the audience knew that to be a liberal was a very bad thing. And I used to work very hard to educate the women about their rights. I had one piece called, Yes, I Vote the Way John Votes. I'd tell them something like this. Now remember, girls, I don't care how old you are. I was young then myself, you see. I don't care what age you are. You are still girls, aren't you? You're not boys, are you? There's 51% of the voters in Canada who are women. And I said most of these women are under subjection to their husbands. And a great deal of them say, well, I vote the way John votes. But not you. Of course, I don't have any trouble with that at all. I vote the way my husband votes, but then he votes the right way. I tell him. Yes, a lot of women, when they get into that polling booth, will do whatever their husbands tell them to do. Well, not you, but unwise women will. They are the kind of women who do what their husbands tell them to do always. If he says, go to this church, they go. If he says, you can go to Shawville to shop on such and such a day, that's the day they go. If he says, this is how much money you can take, that's what they have. Yes, these women do what their husbands tell them. When they get into that polling booth, behind that curtain on election day, they are the ones who will take up the pencil and say to themselves, this is how John would want me to vote. And they vote that way, But not you. Remember, when you get in behind that curtain, you have 51% of the voting power in this country. And when you get in behind that curtain, you forget that you were ever married. And you pick up the pencil and you put your ex in the right place. He'll never know. He'll never know. He'll never know. Yes, well, I got into a peck of trouble preaching that there were a great deal of things a woman can do for herself. But we won't go into that now, will we? We've got a show, and I hope you're good and warmed up for it now.
Oh, you wonder if these stories are true? My goodness, you can't make this stuff up. Now, I grew up in Ottawa. Lived there because my dad was one of the biggest and first hockey stars ever. Frank Finnigan, the Charvel Express, one of the original Stanley Cup winning Ottawa Senators. Now, hockey took us from small town life up in Charvel to an amazing new world beyond any of my parents' experience, or anyone else's for that matter.
Gomorrah?
That would have been my mother. Now, as a girl, I lived for my visits with the family. All of the Horners and sometimes the Finnigans, whoever they could send me up to, up in Charvel. Well, I didn't realize at first that my parents' marriage was breaking down.
Would you just put the girl in the darn train without stopping at every tavern along the way?
Clamps, would you lay off me?
I just thought it was fun to go. And most of the family were fun-loving, storytelling people. But we had our fair share of Hornerites, followers of my great-uncle, the famous preacher Ralph Horner, who was asked to leave the Methodist Church for being too enthusiastic. Now, he started up his own holiness movement, in which the parishioners literally rolled around on the floor in religious ecstasy, which was, by the way, the only physical enjoyment they were allowed. Now, my mother was a Horner, and she was Anglo-Irish and always looked down on the Finnigans.
They're pig Irish, your father's family. Can barely read and write.
I'll give you pig Irish, woman.
And they could drink, and they had just a hootin' good time. But my Hornerite aunts, now they wore those little black hats and those long black dresses and black stockings. And there was no dancing, no gum chewing, no nothing. And sex only for procreation, and not much at that. And my Aunt Catherine, well, she was the holiest of the holy rollers.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Oh, yes! Can you feel the Holy Spirit living within you, sister?
I feel it, brother. I feel it.
Yes, yes, she feels the Spirit.
Oh, yes.
And you can feel the Spirit, and so can you, and you, sister. But it will not come from a fancy car.
Amen, brother.
Oh,
Amen.
it will not come from fancy clothes and finery.
Amen, brother.
Can I get another amen? It will not come from the government that's breathing down your neck.
Amen.
Amen. No, it will only come from God and Jesus Christ, our Savior. Hallelujah. Bless his name.
Oh, bless you. Bless you.
It was kind of fun, all that rolling around. But it was a little scary. Then, at Aunt Catherine's place, if it was a stormy night, we all had to sit at the dinner table.
Gather round, children. Gather round. That's it. Come on, little Johnny. Let us pray. Let us hear the mighty rushing winds of heaven. Shout hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
It's a cyclone of salvation. Shout hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
I told Mom I didn't want to stay with Aunt Catherine, but she didn't seem to care.
Oh, a little religion never did anybody any harm.
If only it was just a little religion.
Joan, what's bred in the blood comes out in the bone. You're a Horner, and it's good. You should know what that means.
As I mentioned, things were not happy up in the home in Ottawa. Well, maybe May Horner and Frank Finnigan could have lived happily enough living in Charville where they grew up. But as part of the first pro sport superstars in the nation's capital in the Roaring '20s, my father's life of lights and action, it collided with her more old-fashioned one. They were always at each other's throats. She really didn't like that everyone in town seemed to know him.
Hello, Frankie. Great game last night.
Hey, thanks, pal.
Who was that?
Got me.
Hey, Finnigan, buy you a drink. Come on.
Sure, pal. Oh, no, I got the family, man. Late, all right. Maybe later.
Who the hell was that? What have you been up to with that one? You should know who your friends are by now.
Hey, Frankie. Nice game last night.
Oh, thanks, pal.
Oh, I suppose she's another little one of your playmates.
Come on, Frankie, let's get that drink.
Oh, good idea.
And in time, my father was accused of sleeping with every woman who spoke to him and of drinking with every man who greeted him. And as a consequence of this, I spent an awful lot of time up in Charville. Now, my story, called A Final Understanding, about Nick and Aggie, well, it's very much based on my favorite uncle and my wonderful visits with the rest of the family.
I fled more and more frequently from our home in the city to the loving, tranquil haven of my grandparents' farm, where the unruffled days moved in preordained order, from the first cock crow in the barnyard to the last sweep in the nighthawk before bedtime, from the rounding up at dawn and the gently swaying, trusting cattle to the nightly bedding down of the prize horses. My Uncle Nick would meet me at the station, this prize mare Flo hitched to the farm's best buggy in summer or to a dark cutter in winter.
The Valley Train, the PPJ, every day for 80 years left Union Station at around 2:30 p.m. to arrive in Charville, well, in the dusk, if it were winter. The steel steps of the train, they always had 2 or 3 inches of ice on them. But the friendly, smiling conductor, he always held my hand really tightly all the way down to the bottom step.
Watch the step, young lady.
Uncle Nick!
Joan! Oh, so good to see you.
And there was my Uncle Nick, a dancing bear on the station boardwalk, and me, I was encompassed. My feet, my back, my shoulders, my head, all you could see of me was my eyes. And I can never remember feeling cold. And I was lulled by the steady onward movement of the cutter, up hills and down hills, slowing down on the inclines and then speeding up again on the flats.
Less wind now.
Sure. We're in a bush a lot, girl. Hey, you all right up there?
Sure, Uncle Nick. Just fine.
Good. On.
And on these magical journeys, my Uncle Nick would nearly always be talking to his little horse, Flo, almost as though she were human.
Gee, girl. Come on, girl. That's my girl. I love you. Let's get you. Get us home. Get us home.
And almost always he would be standing up in that cutter so that he could see far ahead on the trail, and sometimes if the snow was really deep, he would jump out of the cutter and he would go walk along the side of the little horse's head, talking to her.
Come on, girl. Good girl. Come
coaxing her along.
Yeah, that's it.
Leading her almost by sheer will through the deep snow.
Then, one stormy, wind-whipped night, Uncle Nick and I hit a drift so deep that there seemed no way out.
The snow was so bad. The drift was so deep that the little horse was floundering, and Uncle Nick, he called to her and tried to encourage her, but still she floundered. So Uncle Nick, he jumped down from the cutter and plunged into snow up to his waist. He hung on to those reins like a drowning man holding on to a life preserver.
Come on, girl. You could do it.
He tried to talk her around, but still she floundered. Oh, the snow was up to her belly. Suddenly, Uncle Nick, he made a decision, and quick as a flash of chain lightning, he jumped back into that cutter. And his buggy whip, it lashed out into the night.
Get up, girl! Get up now!
The little horse, she almost reared up in shock. Then, angrily, the whites of her eyes showing, she charged that giant drift. And we were through it. And from inside my fur nest, I could tell by the steady assumption of our pace that we were back on packed snow again. And soon after that, we turned.
The farm! We should give Flo some extra oats tonight, Uncle Nick.
Sure thing, girl. Maybe 2 scoops, eh?
And there was my grandmother's welcoming lamp in the kitchen window. I was never more glad to see it. And inside that cozy farmhouse, there was a good stove lit, making the place cozy and warm to dry our clothes, warm us up on the outside. And my grandmother, of course, she'd made a wonderful hot meal to warm us up on the inside. Shortly after that, well, after all the excitement and a hot meal inside me, I started to get a little sleepy, and so I made my way up the narrow stairs into my cozy little bedroom. But just before I fell asleep, I heard my Uncle Nick's voice echoing up the stovepipe.
You know, Davidson's drift almost got us this time.
It's always the worst on the road. Always the worst. That wind comes whistling up from the river flats. It's a terror.
Oh, it's a terror.
It's a terror.
Thought we were done for.
Now, the next morning, when I came down and I confronted my Uncle Nick over the breakfast table.
Morning, Joan.
Morning.
You sleep okay?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Uncle Nick?
Yes, Joan.
Can I ask you something?
Sure, always.
Why did you use the horsewhip on Flo?
My grandfather just stared. But my Uncle Nick, he looked me straight in the eye.
It was all that was left. There was nothing else to do. There was nothing else to do.
I knew that.
But I had to hear him say it. Unfortunately, not all stories in life have happy endings.
Uncle Nick, he was my hero, dashing, kind, and handsome. His horses always won the ribbons at the county fair. Laughing and bantering, always full of fun. He took me for adventures with his favorite black mare. As I grew up, I saw him less. The way it goes with kids, he inherited the farm, and I went off to school, but he didn't seem himself. He lost a lot of his old spark, and the family gossip said things I could not believe were true. To make a long story short, things went from bad to worse. He sold the cattle and the house and ended up in a trailer. They called him awful things, a bad farmer and a drunk, and to all the world he looked like a failure. When I learned the real story after Uncle Nick died, I could see how folks could misconstrue it. When his dad died, his mom said Nick would have to leave school and work the farm. There was no one else to do it. It didn't matter that he wanted to be a doctor. Loved reading, math, and science, would succeed straight away. His big brother and sisters got good jobs with weekends off, but Uncle Nick was the youngest, and someone had to stay. He got the farm when it came time. Barns, horses, and cattle, 200 acres prime. Worked so hard it didn't end. He got the farm and it got him.
Gilly McCarty served her father and her brother. None of the McCartys ever died young. Her father kept the gate locked to keep the neighbors out, and she could only leave the house for church. The harness always stung. Her father was as tight as the paper on the wall. He'd use the bath water over just to save on soap. No man would dare to scale the walls that he put up. The decades passed and Gilly gave up any hope. And when he died, things just got worse. She served her brother. Edwin was a tyrant and a miser to boot. The priest came over and appealed for kindness, but Edwin kicked him out and slammed the door with a hoot. Gilly McCarty was going on 80 when her father finally died at age 91. After all those years of solitude, she was determined she was gonna have some fun. She opened up the gates and she took to going out. She bought dairy cows and gave each one of them a name. She held a big party and all the neighbors came. She was finally free and more than ready for a change. She got the farm when it came time. Farms, horses, and cattle, 200 acres prime. She was born, raised, and stuck there. That's just how things were. Got the farm, and it got her. He got the farm
when it came time. Barns,
horses, and cattle, 200 acres prime. She was born, raised, and stuck there. That's just how things were. She got the farm, and it got her.
He got the farm, and it got him. They got the farm, and now they're gone.
Yes, my dad, Frank Finnigan, the Charvel Express. And, oh, just like nearly everybody else in the world, I worshipped him. Now, we were living on McLeod Street in Centertown, Ottawa, between Bank and Kent. And back then, it was a lovely, shady street with huge trees, and we walked everywhere. And we were surrounded by rinks and flying pucks. Oh, that sound is the backdrop of my childhood. We used to see how many 100 times we could skate around the rink. Well, boys and girls, there was no distinction.
My hockey career ended in grade 5 at Percy Street School. My grade was playing for the girls' championship of the school.
I can remember the feeling of floating effortlessly over the ice, stick-handling my way through the entire opposing team and scoring time after time as the crowd lined up behind the boards of the outdoor rink. They roared their approval. I said they roared their approval. And on one of these scoring passes, I happened to skate past the principal, who was a stately Mr. McNabb.
Look at that girl go. She is just like her father.
She sure is.
Finnigan.
That's it! No more hockey. I want to be a girl.
And right there and then, I made my first move out from under the shadow of my father's legend.
I'm a girl, and I intend to be one. The Ottawa Valley, the cradle of hockey. They lived and they breathed it, and they wrote the book. They played in backyards on a river ice, on any kind of rig. Finnigan, Clancy, Nyber,
whatever it took. The lads from Renfrew and Shawville and towns right up the line stuck the first proteins. With legends we'll never forget, they go by sleigh 4 hours to play an evening match in an unheated rink. They go home covered in sweat.
Every village and hamlet had a ring and a team, and all the talk was hockey through the night and day. Fans would go by train 100 miles to see a big game, in fur coats and whiskey flasks to see the cold at bay. The Ottawa Valley, the cradle of hockey, they lived and they breathed it, and they wrote the book. They played in backyards and river ice on any kind of rink. Finnigan, Clancy, Nyber, Boucher, they did whatever it took.
Fans would go with heated bricks on the way to a game, and stand on them and soak up all the warmth they'd hold. And when the game was done, they'd leave the bricks behind, and if their heroes won, then no one minded the cold.
The city people sneered at the Renfrew millionaires. They thought the country bumpkins were way around the bend, and J. O'Brien stole the show. How he hated the word no. He created a new league and Lake Canadian. The Ottawa Valley, the cradle of hockey, they lived and they breathed it, and they wrote the books. They played in backyards on river ice, on any kind of rink. Finnigan, Clancy, Nyber, Boucher, they did whatever it took.
The great ones lived like rock stars, their every move on view. Partying and drinking and carousing were the norm.
Until the dirty 30s, when the Senators had to fold. They won the cup 9 times and they took the world by storm. The Ottawa Valley, the cradle of hockey, they lived and they breathed it, and they wrote the books. They played in backyards on river ice, on any kind of rink.
King Clancy,
Shawville Express,
Hunt Broadbent,
Cyclone Taylor,
Hot Stewart,
Heckle Ray,
Rat Westwick,
and all the rest.
they did whatever it took.
Well, the fast times they got to my dad. And it was years before he went on the wagon to stay and put his life back together. I wrote a poem about my dad. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read you a couple of stanzas from it. Grey is the forelock now of the Irishman, stick handler of my roaring 20s birthright, the F. Scott Fitzgerald of the sporting world, and between games, father to me. My beautiful, brainwashed Canadian sons are bringing in the whole neighborhood to see the old pro alive, the all-round, right-wing, maple leaf god, Adonis of an arena now crumbled and fallen into the cannibal maw of mobs
The lads were all there, crowding in at the doorway, surrounding me with fiery ring of worship, admiring these very eyebrows, thick with scars, inflicted by such heroes as Clancy, Shard, Warner.
Wrinkled now is the brow of my all-star father, standing in the doorway of his grandchildren's generation, who yet must learn in smaller forms and with less limelight how heroes are really made.
How heroes are really made.
How heroes are really made.
How heroes are really made. We had a cottage up in Sand Bay, Quebec, on the Ottawa River.
Oh, I wonder if there's a dance at the hall tonight.
Until you're 16, Joan, just forget about it. Stay out of the dance halls.
Throughout the rondelets of summer, the bay, it always provided my ears with wilderness music, but the most exciting music of all was man-made.
Oh, I just love how Lindsay Judd plays the fiddle.
Well, you can love it from home.
Mother, well, you can hear it from the cottage, but hardly.
Lindsay Judd. Oh, he drew his bow across our fantasies and longings as we lay in bed yearning to be part of the Saturday night and forbidden by our mother to do so.
As they say, a whistling girl and a cackling hen always come to a bad end.
And as far as I can recall, my mother kept us to our deadline, and our feet never physically touched the dance hall floor until we were 16.
But we managed to flit about in the shadows pretty effectively. There are many earthly delights on display.
Did you see that fight?
Who talked me into that?
Jeez, that was a good one. I'm a wonder you didn't get in.
Get that stuff? That stuff's amazing. I think my uncle used to make something like that.
Here, get ready to go.
There's only work and worry all our live long week. A wedding dance on Saturday is all the fun we need. Inside there isn't any booze, mostly squares and tea. But out in the parking lot the lads are on a spree. Magic in the fiddles, moonshine in the jar, eager girls in half-ton trucks,
And romance in the stars.
music on the water, carrying the sound of all the fun you can before the morning chores come round.
What's up, kid?
Hey, look at him go!
Feet of flame. parking lot show.
It didn't
end up pretty. Tempers running mean and high. Angry words and slights enough excuse to start a fight. We're good at dancing jigs and reels. We're nimble on our feet. We're good at throwing punches and we've never known defeat. We're magic in the fiddle, moonshine in the jar, and the girls in half-ton trucks,
and romance in the stars.
Will you breathe, girl? You do yourself some damage.
I thought I was at church. Exercise.
Music and the water,
carrying the sound. Have all the fun you can before the morning chores come round. Have all the fun you can before the morning chores come round.
Lads, it's a fight. Quick, get into her this time, lads. Come on, let's.
Come on. I got money on him.
Time passed quickly. High school, boyfriends. Losing a boyfriend I really loved during the war. And then there was university. Now, most girls, they go to college to find a husband and not for knowledge. Me, I had a genuine thirst for knowledge and ended up finding a husband who was an education in himself. Now, after the war, he became a doctor, and we moved to Kitchener, Ontario's industrial heartland, which was not my natural habitat.
Oh, Joan, you did make it.
Oh, thank goodness you are here.
I was afraid you wouldn't come.
Well, if you weren't here, I'd have been leaving soon, because I can't do these dues without someone like you here to help me out. Thank you for coming. It's always, the talk is always about business and money. That's all there is to it.
Do you remember at this one party, there was this woman, and it was all about the black velvet.
What? Oh, my. That's her. Black velvet and pearls against her legally kept white skin. I am convinced that her furniture and her floors and her china are more important to her than her own children.
Oh, surely not.
I have an idea.
What?
Just you watch this.
Oh, Joan, you're not.
I am. Hello, my name is Joan.
Enchantée, Madame Beausoleil.
Nice.
Shall we?
Oh, please do.
That is my husband.
Oh, nice.
What's the point of just making money anyway?
Do you know what that oaf would like to do?
I'd really like to do something meaningful.
He would like to teach.
Like teaching. Teachers can really help kids.
He thinks that it is the most important profession in the world.
And what could be more important than that?
He is an idiot. You should hear him rave.
So what does he do now?
Oh, now he's a general manager at a boot factory here in town.
And so why doesn't he go into teaching if he's so keen, and if managing boots doesn't nurture his soul? After all, teaching is improving. The lot of them, it's really improving these days. It's much better for the teachers.
Excusez-moi, madame. We are used to a very high standard of living. Surely you are not suggesting that we lower that?
I certainly would.
Oh! Jacques, on s'en va. And we're taking your chairs, too.
Oui, chérie.
I was full of whiskey and water and hatred and venom for all the life erasers who kill in the name of love. And this did not make me the life of the party. All you fine Kitchener ladies, your husbands run the show. You live in silent mansions with your fluted jello molds. Your silver is all polished, special boxes for your hats. You fret about how things should look, what neighbors think of that.
You peer out from the draperies in stuffy living rooms, your plush and silent carpets in your perfect lifeless gloom. You whisper nasty rumors while smiling oh so sweetly. You dole out quarters to the poor whom you despise completely. All you Kitchener ladies, all you happy Kitchener wives, your wedding ring proves the value of your perfect Kitchener lives. You fine Kitchener ladies, your husbands run the show. You live in silent mansions with your fluted jello molds. Your town is run by perfect folk, your names adorn the plans. You've built this stolid Kitchener like a giant hill of ants. I could not be that smug and dull, never cared what people thought. I couldn't give a hoot about the new things that you bought. All you Kitchener ladies, all you happy Kitchener wives, your wedding ring proves the value of your perfect Kitchener lives. You fine Kitchener ladies, your husbands run the show. You live in silent mansions with your fluted jello molds. My house is full of music and a place for everyone, a place where children gather and where folks stop by for fun. There are books on the shelf and friends laugh happily. I'm sure you Kitchener ladies can manage without me. All you Kitchener ladies, all you happy Kitchener wives, your wedding ring proves the value of your perfect Kitchener lives. You fine Kitchener ladies, your husbands run the show. You live in silent mansions with your fluted jello molds.
You live in silent mansions with your fluted jello molds. So this is the hardest part of the story, and so one I'll sum up, no details. They say that marriage is like flying hundreds of miles of boredom with just a few moments of ecstasy. Well, we tried. And they also say that trying to revive a nearly expired marriage is like trying to start a fire with wet wood. And predictably, it didn't work. And so I moved out with our 3 children, 2 teenagers and a preteen. And to cut a long story short, my husband, Grant, died. And the insurance company, they called it suicide, which left me and my children with nothing and no visible means to keep a roof over our head. the procession of all my dreams through grief is feature length. A suicide always kills 2 or more, and I do not hope for anything now but a long, productive life. The power of love is our only human survival mechanism, as is the wing for birds. But nobody understands it.
Well, I guess you'll be getting that teaching certificate now.
I'm not so sure about that, Mother.
Well, otherwise, how are you going to feed that brood of yours?
Do you not recall I taught in that little one-room schoolhouse up in Erdley before the war for a whole year, and it was hell on earth. And besides, teaching takes everything you have if you're the kind of person who can't do things by halves.
Well, don't expect us to bail you out. The Shawville Express got sidetracked a long time ago.
And eventually I acquiesced and I went back to Queen's and I got my BA. Do you know they made me take 2 damn grade 13 honors courses? But I did it. I got my BA. My children, they were so proud. Now everyone was pressuring me to teach. And so I sat and thought about it all summer and did nothing. Well, I did do something. I took my best writings and I sent them off to Ian McNeill at the National Film Board, and he wrote straight back.
Come immediately. We have work for you.
And the doors just opened. So I would write in the mornings until about a 11:45. Now that's when my kids came home from school for their lunch.
What's to eat? I'm starving.
You're always starving.
You too? I don't think you wiped your feet when you came in here, now did you? Go on and wipe your feet, and while you're at it, you wash your hands. It is lunchtime. And we'd spend our time together. Well, I was determined to be there for those kids. To me, mothering matters most. Now, after they went back to school, after lunchtime, I would do a little housework, clean up here and there, maybe throw a wash in. And then, oh then, I would nap. That has been my salvation. I can nap.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that.
What is your problem?
That's all your fault.
It's not how is it my fault. It's totally your fault.
And then they come back from school.
What did I do?
What is
everything?
the problem here with you two?
I can't figure out this stupid equation.
Oh, I hate the way they teach math these days. Do you think you might be able to help out a little bit here, dear?
Sure, it's not so hard.
And so we'd spend some more time together, and I'd help them out as much as I could. And then would be the evening, and okay, you two, time for bath. Time for bed. You definitely need a bath tonight. Don't forget to brush your teeth, you two. And please, don't make me come up and remind you to put your lights off at 9 o'clock, okay? Off you go. I love you both.
Love you.
Good night. And after they faded out around 9 o'clock, I would walk the dog, and then I'd go back to my writing. And I would write until about 1:30 when the radio, CBC, would be signing off.
CBC Radio, signing off. Good night.
It's never been easy being a writer. And even in the golden age of Canadian literature, all but the few top writers were, well, they were either living on the avails of their spouses or starving. But, do you know, when my dad played hockey, they say that nothing and nobody could trip him up. And I'm too much of a Finnigan to go down on my knees either.